Strong Dads wants to thank 4Speed on 50 for sponsoring today's show. If you like classic cars, great food, and a taste of Americana, you have to visit 4Speed on 50's Diner, located on Route 50 in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Stop in today for a meal and an experience you won't soon forget at 4Speed on 50's Diner. Welcome to Strong Dads. This is Merrill Hutchinson along with Carl Andre bringing you another great show. How are you today, Carl?
I'm doing good. How are you, Merrill?
Good.
Yeah.
We had to shovel some snow today.
Well, yeah.
This week?
Yeah, we're fortunate we don't do a whole lot of shoveling.
Yeah,
We're at an age where we've gotten smart.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, I'd hate to say I had my tractor shoveled snow and I sat on it.
Yeah.
And went, man, I wish I had a warm seat cushion.
Yeah. Nice tractor, by the way.
I see these guys. Really, no offense to farmers, like we love our farmers, but some of these pieces of equipment that these guys are driving around, the air conditioning, Bose speaker stereos,
It's changed a lot.
Man, that's not what I grew up with.
No, from my youth, it was a completely different story. I remember when the big articulating tractors came on, on the scene, and those were, and now the cabs, like you said, and they're so computerized. It's in fact. It won't be long. This is just a little thing that you will not have people driving tractors. I've already seen things that we've been developing at different times where you're going to go by a field and there's these things out there running around. So it's incredible what's going on.
Yeah, just running off of GPS points and all that.
Yeah,
but
that's a different show.
That's good
stuff.
They've
really come a long way.
Yeah. All right, well, we've got I think we got a great show today, a great topic, even though it's probably one that we wish didn't happen in our life, but it does happen. It happens all the time.
All the time.
Right now, Linda and I are on a little watch what we eat thing. I always hate to say diet and all that stuff, but we're trying. We're 2.5 weeks deep into this, whatever, and we're having some success.
Yeah,
but
I watch everything I eat.
Yeah. But it wouldn't be surprising to me if 6 months from now I went back to where I was.
Oh, it's so easy.
Yeah. I went back to where I was. And so that's a little bit in the line of what we're going to talk about today.
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah. You want to say, because you're the one who brought up this phrase to me about the Egypt thing. So you want to.
I've been saying it for years. In fact, I did a sermon on this 25 years or 20 some years ago, and it hit me that everyone has their Egypt. And we'll explain that in a little bit. But if there's things that you've seen in life, I'll guarantee you that you have witnessed, and you wonder why these things happen the way they do. But since that time, I don't know how many times in my life I've said, well, everybody has their Egypt. I've said it about myself. I say it about other people. Yeah. But you've got some sponsors that you want to get into.
Yeah. Let's thank our sponsors. Let's get into some conversation. We want to thank Quality Auto Mart, Casey's Outdoor Solutions, and 4Speed on 50 Diner. So if you are doing any kind of business or connected in any way with any of those businesses, thank them for sponsoring the Strong Dads podcast. We just appreciate that. We also want to thank all you folks out there that are listening, you guys that are listening, your wives that are listening and sharing the show. It just helps us. And I continue to say, there's not a week that goes by that I don't have a guy that comes in my office and said, hey, I heard something through your show. That's why I'm here. So that's all I need right there to say that this is good stuff that we get to do.
And on that note, real quick, and the rest of your sponsors are great, but I was down at 4Speed on 50 here not too long ago. I had a great breakfast, and the service was phenomenal. I won't say the person's name in case they're not there whenever this show is watched somewhere in the future, but it was just, I really recommend going down there and eating.
Yeah.
I'm a foodie. So
yeah, is that amount of or quality of?
Both.
Okay.
It was, a lot of times you get these high end restaurants. You go in and pay all this money, and they bring out this thing that looks artistic, and I'm thinking I'm a golden corral kind of person.
Yeah, is that the appetizer?
Yeah. When you have to stop and get a sandwich on the way home.
Yeah, heaven would be Golden Corral married to Jeff Ruby's.
Something like that, yeah. Maybe that is heaven.
In our area, Jeff Ruby's is kind of the elite, so that's cool. All right, so let's get into our conversation. Really, this is coming from the story in Exodus
Yeah.
15 through 18, where Moses has got all of these Israelites that he's moving out of slavery, right? And so it wasn't like they had a cream puff life as slaves for all those years to the Egyptians. And finally, he's like, "Hey, Pharaoh, we're leaving," right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's,
it's not so. It doesn't actually go that easily.
Right. Yeah, there's a whole lead up to it.
Yeah, in fact, we want to touch on that, but let's back up just a little bit, because what I said earlier is that I'm going to ask you, just think about this. How many times in your life that you've looked at somebody, maybe a spouse who had an abusive spouse who is being beaten, or being abused, and goes back, to that person, or goes back into that situation. And we look from the outside and go, how could you do that?
Yeah.
How could, the Bible has a saying in it, like a dog to its vomit is a fool to his folly. How we return and return and return again like that. But we look at these situations and we can, on the extreme side of it, we don't understand it. And we wonder, why does somebody do that? And we think we wouldn't do that. But I'll challenge that and say it's in our nature. Yeah. It's the more easy side of our nature. It may not seem that way. And this chapter in the Bible, this book in the Bible, really outlines human nature at its finest or worst, if you really want to look at it. So Pharaoh, Moses, to back a little bit further, Moses is told to go into Egypt. He goes, and Pharaoh's heart is hardened.
Yeah.
And he is not going to turn the people loose. And if you think about slavery, if you've watched some of the 10 Commandments, you see they weren't treated well. They were slaves, and then comes the plagues.
Right.
And these were not private.
Yeah.
These are very public events. You can imagine the frogs, the fire, the turning of the Red Sea or the Nile red, and the cattle, and then the firstborn. These are not happening in a black hole or in a vacuum. So everybody's watching these things and experiencing these things. And finally, Pharaoh does let them go.
After
reluctantly.
Yeah.
And they flee.
Yeah.
Basically out of Egypt.
But I want to go back a little bit.
Sure.
We did a show, couple shows back, I believe it was, about you see what you're looking for. Some of us see the negative, and some see the positive.
Yeah.
And we talked about, we see the negative because it's kind of a survival mechanism.
It's our default.
Yeah.
It's much easier to see negative happen. It's like I think the stock market was the analogy I drew.
Yeah.
Is that it can drop easily 25%. But to go up is not really what you expect at all. So we're geared that way.
Yeah. And so that's actually a little bit, I think, of what's happening here, because people can't see, the Israelites can't see what could be better. So it's better to deal with the pain I know than the potential pain I don't know.
That's right. And when they get out, they see the parting of the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army is wiped out. And they get out, and this is where that saying came from. You see that they get out into the desert for a short period of time, relatively, and things aren't going the way they thought it would.
Yeah.
And they say to Moses, basically, did you lead us out of Egypt to die in the desert? Mm-hmm. And they then say, we want to go back.
Yeah.
And that's where I came up with that saying that everybody has their Egypt. We will almost always take certain pain over the unknown.
Yeah.
It takes so much faith and courage and things like that to wander out. So when you see this maybe a woman who goes back to a husband, the whole idea of coming up with a job on her own, supporting the kids, how's it's going to work? As bad as it is, we will return to that pain over the uncertainty, because fear is there's an old saying, fear is false evidence appearing real.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things we start building up, and the why we can't is so stronger than the why we can or should.
And people can stay then stuck for a lifetime.
A lifetime.
Yeah, an absolute lifetime.
A lifetime.
We see it a lot in our work. So this is a little bit of a challenge for me, because, in our work with marriage and family work, we are faith-based. We are always to be pro-marriage and stick into the marriage, go through the hard times. But there are cases that you have to go, okay, like, why are you in this? You've lived on first floor. He's lived in basement for 25 years. You two don't even talk to each other, right? And so they're keeping that pain because either they're scared or they made a commitment to God, right, of marriage. And so it gets a little challenging. Like, well, am I committed to God here, or am I just so afraid to move out and go to something new? And I'm not here to judge that. But it's tough because people will stay in these situations, and on the outside you're thinking, there's nothing about your life. You're sinning more in your life because of all the resentment that you carry every single day because of the situation you're in. Yeah.
And the abandonment. So I get a question about that. Is that their Egypt, though? From the standpoint that they don't have the power or willingness or the ability to do the work to improve that?
Yeah. I think in many cases, and I say that because I think in many cases, even though we may not particularly, I'll just use the word like that partner we're with, they provide something. A lot of times it's financial resources. Right. It's a level of stability. It's kids. We've had kids together. Yeah. Right. So there's something that's been provided that we don't want to mess that up. And so we're going to we'll live with this to keep this. Right. Which is still, we've got a lot of pain there. Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't advocate for divorce. I'm sure you don't either, unless it's extreme cases. There are biblical reasons for that. But, I've watched people over the years stay in a relationship simply because of the finances. Yep. It's what Bill Engvall said one time. They asked him, how did he stay married all those years being a comedian on the road? He said, because I never met a woman worth half. Yeah. So there are reasons that they stay in those kinds of things that aren't necessarily biblical from that standpoint. Mm-hmm. But we all tend to gravitate toward the familiar. Mm-hmm. And we will almost always take that path of least resistance from the standpoint of what it takes us to grow. Yeah. And I've been guilty of it. I've stagnated in areas in my life for years. And, there takes a lot of forms. You might be somebody who was abused as a child and you become a perpetual victim your whole life. Yeah. Instead of moving beyond that, your Egypt is to go back and rely on that identity. You return to that instead of growing past that. It might be these bad habits that you return to. Or a job or whatever. But it's in the Bible, and I look at this and go, we wonder about it, but you see, and the other side of this is the Israelites eventually make their own God. They lose their faith, and faith is such a big part of if you're going to do therapy, if you're going to take on a new job, if you're going to take on a new adventure, if you're going to try to change your marriage, if you're going to try to affect a big change in your life, it takes faith. That first and foremost.
Yeah. So as you're talking there, it's thinking about, and we're going to get into this a little bit about the faith and God's will. And so I can think of times like when I was in my early 20s, the adventure thinking of me of I'm moving to Colorado. Yeah. I'm moving to someplace adventurous, Yeah. And God had nothing to do with that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it was about me being excited or fun or whatever, but I never did those things. And I didn't do those because of the fear of, is it going to work out? I'll be out there by myself. You know what I mean? So there's this chicken factor that was in there. No, where I live, the vanilla Midwest, right? The lukewarm Midwest. Yeah. I'll just stay here.
I'll stay right here.
Yeah. And so, but I was never, in my mind, called there with any kind of God connection. It was truly this would just be fun.
It'd be fun to do.
So there's a difference there.
There's a romanticism to it.
Yeah, that's the right word. That's the right word. And so sometimes we don't want to give, because sometimes we're talking to guys about you didn't do something in your life that maybe you regret, but was that God driven and ordained, or was that just because you thought it'd be fun or cool or interesting? Yeah. And that's to differentiate. I don't have the answer to that right
that's
now.
One of the things when we're going to talk here in a little while about knowing God's will is it's really crucial to divorce yourself from pride. Because a lot of what you're talking about back in the youth, at least for me, was some sort of prestige or some sort of way that people would look at you and say, oh, how great that is that you can do that. Yeah. Not that necessarily you were called to do it. from the standpoint it really fired your jets. It
Yeah.
just seemed like it'd be cool to do, and people might look at that and admire you for that.
Look
or
what-
go,
you did
"Look
that?
You did
Yeah.
what? You
Yeah.
just up and took off? Yeah. So that'll be, but let's also talk about, when we're talking about faith, we talk about the other reality of this story, this account in the book of Exodus, is what we hear so often. And I just had this discussion with somebody that I work with, and he's struggling with his daughter and her belief. And the thing is always coming back is like, well, if only I had proof. If only I had proof. And that is something, the Bible, Jesus says, better are they who believe, who did not see, than those who saw. And that faith is stronger. But when you look at this account with the Israelites, nobody, at least from everything I can see in the Bible and history, nobody had more evidence of the miraculous and powerful nature of God. They had these plagues. They have water coming out of a rock that Moses strikes us, and you've got
The manna
falling,
quail.
quail deep. I don't remember how deep it was. You've got a column of fire, a pillar of cloud that's guiding them. You've got all this stuff. And and I don't know where you are in your walk, but if you're thinking that, I'm just going to tell you, that's just not true. Because, I heard a guy say one time, I'm the kind of person that would say, if there's a God, make this statue wave. And if it waved, I'd go, do that again.
Do it with your other hand.
Do that again. So faith is something other than fact.
Yeah.
You might gather as much information as you can, but if you think that when you get, it's sort of like what I felt with money. If I just had more money, I'd be happy. That was a fallacy. And if you think if you actually had a physical account of this, that would solidify your faith, if that's what you're waiting for, well, understand, we got a whole nation of people who that didn't work for.
Yeah.
And there's so many more accounts too. When Moses, or was it Aaron, held the emblem of snake up, and and the people who didn't look on that died, and the earth, it's amazing to me, and I've fallen into that too. There's a certain point where you got to have faith. It just comes down to faith, and you got to have that as a Christian before you really do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a difficult one, because I have yet to master the idea of, will you give me a sign? Yeah. Can you show me, or am I sure
Here's your sign.
Is this the right way? And I think that becomes from, I really just would rather it be plain and simple and clean, right? Jesus says, greater are those who believe and have not seen, right? The idea that it's going to take a lot for you to just surrender it and go, no, I just have to go. I just have to go, because that's what I'm feeling called to do. So.
Yeah, why don't we? I don't think this show needs to be as long as some of our others. I mean, we can get to this. So, I think we're at a point where we talk about, at least for me, some of the ways that I tend to know better what God's will is. I won't say that I've ever known absolutely for certain.
Yeah.
But what I tend to rely on as far as what God's will is.
Let me hear it.
Okay.
Because then I'm going to push back.
Sure, push back. First of all, I think it's important we're talking about strong men, that you've got to remember you're to be the provider. And I think a lot of decisions need to be based around that, that you need to first and foremost be a provider. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're providing the full income or the income. It may be you're supplying support or whatever to make that family function. But first and foremost, you need to be a provider. And I say that because so many times people get into will, like with this, the inverse side of this is, I'm going to go do this and shuck all their responsibilities.
Yeah.
So then you end up with a disaster. They think, well, I'm being led to do this, and I just don't believe that's biblical. The Bible says a man who does not provide for his family is no better than a heathen.
Right.
So I think first you need to have that frame. You need to be praying about it. That seems so obvious. Pray about it. Be sure to be in prayer about it, and don't be rushed from that standpoint. Chuck Swindoll had a few points too. He said, is it something that won't leave you? So this isn't something.
The persistence of the thought.
It's
is that
there.
What you're saying? Yeah.
It's in you. It's something that, with time, I think all of us can get jacked up about something for a day, an hour, a week, maybe a month. But is it something that's been on your heart for a period of time?
Right.
The other thing that he pointed out, and I think it's a good point, are you just as willing to stay as to go? So sometimes when we're trying to convince ourselves about God's will, we're not actually going to something as much as we're running from something. Maybe running back to an Egypt, or running from a job or a difficult situation that really we're not really called to leave, but we feel we have to leave because of pride or whatever it is. We're not willing to do the work. So are you just as willing to stay as to go? And I think that's a key point to say, okay, I could do this, but I feel called to do that. And if I can't do that, I can still do this. I can weather this. I'll make it work, as opposed to fleeing something.
Right.
I know that seems inverse maybe to everyone has their Egypt, where you say it's an abusive relationship. But, and people flee from that. But in a lot of situations, it's about, are you just as willing to stay as to go?
Let me hover around that for a second. And that would be this isn't a pushback. This is something that we'll see in our line of work with marriage, especially if there's been an affair or even one person leaving the other. And, especially hot off of the press of this affair or this new relationship budding, there's a lot of, I'll just say, lust, right? There's a lot of excitement and a lot of energy. And it's very common that you will hear, I finally met my soulmate.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of energy behind it. And Carl, I'm not kidding you. You will hear people say, I believe God's led me to this person.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pushback on my say, no, God does not do anything that ruins what his nature is. And his nature is family. It's the building block.
Right.
So he would not say, well, let's go destroy your family for the sake of this new relationship. That's contrary to how the perfect nature of God is.
Right. And that's the one I skipped right here.
Yeah.
Is it biblical?
Right.
I mean, that's the big one right there. I should have got that right out at first, and it was the third one on my list. But is it biblical? It's not biblical to have an affair.
Right. It's
not biblical to commit these kinds of things. So,
no matter how good it feels.
No.
Right? And I think that's really important. Like,
yeah.
But no,
Yeah.
I get it. She's hot and she's fun. She's exciting.
Right.
But that's Satan at his best right there.
And marriage is sometimes, it's one of those things that you want it to be that kind of state all the time. Mm-hmm. People seek that. And in our culture, it's this whole idea of romantic love. And all the movies are just like, you see a snapshot of part of a movie and this fake couple's history. That's not, I hate to say it. It's, It just, in case you don't know, it's tough at times, So these things on the side fire you up in a way, and you think that this is reality. It's probably not for the most part.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Seek wise counsel. And I'll say this: at times in my life, when I was getting ready to do something asinine, while I was trying to explain it to somebody and lay this out, I felt stupid. I start to feel, well, this is really, you have two choices at the time. You can redouble your efforts and say no, with your pride. No, I'm convinced. Or you can listen to that little voice in your head, which is probably God saying, that really is a stupid idea. What as me telling, and that ties into the other thing that I feel is key. If you're going to do something, if you're going to make a major change in your life, and this may not always be true, but if you're going to take on an adventure or do something, I believe you should be able to tell it to a seventh grader and they understand. That's been a key factor for me. If you can't break it down to the level a seventh grader can understand it, then you probably haven't thought it through and don't understand it well enough yourself. So that's true with investments. It's true with a lot of things. You think, well, I'm going to go over here and do this. And it's, well, you got this, that, and the other. And if you do this premium, you do all this other stuff. If you can't take something and break it down to where a seventh grader can understand it, then my opinion is you don't understand it well enough yourself.
Yeah. The word that's coming to my mind is when we have to get into the weeds to explain something, there's a lot of in the background rationalization thinking going on.
Right.
I'm going to have to rationalize, and so I'm working to convince myself that this is right and good, and so I'm double talking everything so the 7-year-olds their head spinning, right?
Right.
But
or you're glossing over things.
Yeah.
If you find yourself trying, well, that's not really important. You know, if somebody looks at you and you're trying to explain and you're seeking wise counsel, somebody, and I understand, you know, I'm sure when Abraham went to certain people, we go back to Abraham and he was called to go out into the desert himself, that it probably didn't make a lot of sense to his friends and relatives, acquaintances, whatever it is. There's going to be that side of it. There are a lot of people who would rather you stay where you are than to show them what's possible. I understand that. But if you can't, especially, and I say this especially with investments, if you can't explain it to a 7th grader, if you can't break it down into components that they could understand it, then you don't understand it well enough.
Yeah.
And that's a danger, because and that's one area I might be more focused in. But I think in general, if you're going to do something, it should be something you can explain. And in explaining to somebody, or especially somebody wise, if you start to feel silly, like, well, it doesn't really make that is kind of stupid. Now that I think it, as I'm listening to myself verbalize this. So I think for me, those have been some of the things that have helped me at different times.
Here would be my pushback on that.
Sure.
And it's kind of a half-baked pushback, because I think it's just, you can't, it's just more complicated. And that is, there are many times things that you are drawn to that do not make sense, even under good counsel. I'll
Sure.
exaggerate it. That, like, I can't think of anybody that would say to Abraham, sacrificing Isaac is a good idea. You know what? If that's what you're being called to do, then you could, like, so that's an extreme kind of thing. But I think there are sometimes, I can think of a missionary, a younger man who had some kiddos. He had a young wife and had some good things going. And he was like, I feel called to dump it all and go to a dangerous place in Africa, remove his family, and go there and start. And I mean, like, that's a tough call.
That's a tough call.
You know, that's not one of those that just even good counsel might go, you might want to think about this, right?
Yeah.
So some things we are called to do are so difficult that they are complicated.
Right.
And when sometimes they're so complicated that I can't really explain to you why I'm having. Does that make sense? Like,
Right.
I can't really explain to you why this is on my heart like this.
Right. And I'm not saying about this person. There is always a danger here. Mental illness can play a role. People who have bipolar disease, you know, they can make the argument that they are very convinced. So there is a fine line. Unfortunately, back to what we said earlier, this may sound contrary, Abraham had God speaking to him.
Right.
So that would have been a
little bit more convincing.
Right, definitely more convincing. It would have been a little tougher for us. But again, I look at biblically and I don't see that there's not a call for that.
Right.
So these kinds of things first play into it. I think that's just, I would say, in my opinion, and it's just my maybe looking at life, I'd say that 99% of the people who are called are not called to such an extreme.
Right, yeah.
And those may happen today. I will say this, of people that I've seen many times do that, it was not well thought out. It was maybe they were running from something, or they had their pride involved in it. They thought that this would make their mark. And some part of this plays into about legacy, a desire to create a legacy. It's very hard to divorce yourself from the internal motives. Now, I'm not saying that about whoever this individual was and some of the people who've done that. But I'd say for most of the people who are watching this, these aren't those kind of things that are going to happen. It might be that you just need to change jobs. You know, it might be that you need to do something to better your family from the standpoint of maybe entering therapy. Yeah. You know, if you've got a dynamic that's happening there. I've said it, therapy, in my opinion, is one of the toughest things you'll ever do.
Yep, that's why people don't stick with it.
They don't. So when I look at an Egypt, when I say everybody has their Egypt, for me, the Egypt was at many different junctures to return or stay put, to stay in that respect. So there's a lot of areas that this can play out, that you're not just relocating a family, just up and quitting a job.
Well, let me. Part of what we have to do is we always should take into account who else would or could be impacted by this. So let me go back to the missionary family. This may initially, I don't even know, it may have initially been his idea. I don't know, right? Like he may have been the first person that spoke it into words. His wife jumped right on board. And it took them some time to formulate how they were going to do this well with their family.
Well, that's key, right?
Yeah,
there.
so it took it from being a manic idea of mine to we're gonna flesh this thing out. We're gonna figure it out the best we can, and then we're gonna jump in faith. And because the two of them came together, she wasn't like being drugged. They've been there for like, as far as I know, 8 years, 9 years.
I think I know who you're talking about.
It's still working, right?
Yeah.
And I don't even know whether it's easy or hard, but it's still working.
They're in a bad spot, if it's who I'm thinking. Yeah. They are in a bad area of the world.
Yeah. And so, but it took the whole coming together, right? Like everybody, this is who it's going to impact. So let's make sure we get this covered. Because if you're dragging people who don't agree or don't accept it, then I think you're really putting other people in jeopardy.
And that comes down, I think, and I'm not saying I know what their discussions were about, that explaining to a seventh grader. Mm-hmm. To sit down with somebody, the thing I find is dangerous, and especially I saw this in recovery, somebody would just up and quit their job.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just one day they got angry or they felt, I can't do this, or, I'm not, there's something better for me, and they quit. Yeah. That's not smart.
Right.
It's just not smart. And doing that in any other area of your life is not smart, in my opinion. You said they sat down, they talked about it. She felt convicted ultimately. They looked at a way to make this happen. There was a transition. If it's who I think it is, then they had to go to Paris.
Yep.
They had to learn the language.
Yep.
There was a whole process that they entered into. This wasn't some
lots of opportunities to jump off.
A lot of opportunities to say, hey, this may not be right, or this isn't working. But for that, as they started working through that process, obviously the obstacles started falling.
Yeah.
And the ways started becoming more obvious. And that was one of the other things I had on here that I didn't mention is whatever it is, I think if God's going to call you to do something, it should be in your natural abilities. It should be something that you are naturally gifted with and that God gifted you to do. I think that's another one of the indicators I look at is it's like, no, I don't believe, and maybe I'm wrong, God would ever call me to be an accountant.
You wouldn't call me.
I am not good at that.
Right.
And you might think, well, somebody comes up with this great opportunity and they lay it out to you and you get all jacked up about it. Wait a minute. That's not how God made me. Mm-hmm. Now, I may be able to grow into that, but I found that you better be doing things in your life that play to your natural strengths. And I think God designed the whole system that way. He gifted you certain abilities that are unique to you. And I believe if you're going to be called to do something or led to do something, it's going to be along those lines, not some completely out of your realm. So
I think as you talk about that, I think, probably not being called outside of your gift set, but I think oftentimes I'm guilty of this, probably have been called within my gift sets, but did not have confidence or faith in my own gift sets.
Right.
Maybe the ability to do some certain types of counseling or do some types of coaching, and I'd be, oh man, that's probably beyond my head there. That's I don't know.
Yeah.
And so questioning your own abilities, and that's, I think, ultimately I've said, that's a slap in God's face. Here he equipped you to do something, and you're saying, no, that's a slap in God's face.
Yeah.
So
some of that, though, is probably healthy because, to have, I don't know if it's humility, to have a little bit of doubt. Some of the worst people in the world have done things in total confidence of, that they were to do this. And I'm thinking of names right now that come to mind. I don't want to throw them out. World leaders who have done some horrible atrocities because they probably didn't ever think, I don't know, didn't have that moment where they had the doubt. And then that's where the faith comes in. We could probably go around all this, but I'm just going to ask you, where is it here that you feel that we might have missed the mark on this?
Well, one phrase came to mind as you were talking. I have a little phrase when I'm working with guys, and that is there's confidence in yourself. And this is, just take it for what I'm saying here. You could throw holes in it all day long, but confidence in yourself is called arrogance. Confidence in God is called faith.
Good job. That's a good point.
So like if it's too far into how I'm great, So I would see, I think somewhere in here, something that we just haven't mentioned the word, but keeps coming to my mind because of the culture we live in. Comfort has been our Egypt. Comfort has been our Egypt. It's kept us from moving big rocks and mountains and changing because, man, I can be so comfortable where I'm at. I can be so fooled. I can still do great things where I'm at, by the way, right?
Yeah.
But am I working to what I totally being called to do or the potential of? And I believe in our country, especially, I for whatever reason, I've been on this kick of watching all of these pioneer explorers and fur traders and trappers. And I think, you know what? I don't think there's too many guys that I know that could even begin to have the spirit to do that, to go out into the unknown and just have to survive and figure that out because my lazy boy really feels good right now. Yeah. And so comfort has been, I think, in large part, our Egypt in this country.
Well, and a friend of mine said that here a while back. It hit me right between the eyes that aging is the desperate pursuit of comfort. And some of that is because our bodies are, so we're medicating, we're trying to, whatever it is, you're trying to maintain. So it's this desperation that goes along with it. But it takes a lot of forms, like you said. If we live in a house, we turn up the thermostat. We don't have to go out and chop the wood.
I didn't have to cut wood or anything.
Right, and you don't have to go down to the lake and fish. I remember I used to gold pan. And there was a guy that there was a little station, Sun Station, on 52 between Indianapolis and my hometown in New Palestine. So I heard that this guy had been a gold panner. And so I went up and sat with him. It was just fascinating. This guy was like nearly 100 then. And he had been, you go back, this is 1979. So at the turn of the century, he's out west gold panning. And he lived in a tree. And he had this sleuth on the mountainside, and he talked about how when they would go into San Francisco, he would cut this area right here, and you would roll up money, and you put it in different places, and you had money that people could steal because that's what was going to happen to you. When you came into town as a panner, they knew you were cashing gold in, so you probably had money, and you didn't have, you're going back out kind of thing. So I listened to that lifestyle. I'm thinking, that is so removed from anything that we can relate to today, to be living in a tree out in the middle of nowhere, panning gold, fending for yourself, then going in and taking a risk on being killed. And, it's like crazy.
Yeah. Well, and let's just hover there for a second. How, this is just, I don't know the answer. I wonder how much our society today is completely missing the mark or the pull of God because of the trap of comfort. Like how many of us, we lived a life and someday when we sit with Christ and go, how'd we do? Man, I was pulling on you, but that chair just had you buckled in. Yeah. I just wonder how often we have missed things because we were seeking comfort.
Well, that'll be something I have to account for. Yeah, I've wasted a lot of time. So my question would be to the listeners, if you've listened this far, is look at your life. Maybe that's an area. That's an area I need to take an assessment. Yeah. Assess yourself and ask yourself, where has God called you? Sometimes, maybe it's time to pick something up and dust it off. Something that's been with you for a long time. I think if it's something that won't leave you or hasn't left you, even if it's just percolating back there in the back. What is that? What is your Egypt right now that's preventing you from moving forward in an area of your life? What is your Egypt? Because we definitely tend to go to the comfort, and that's what the Egyptians are saying. We'd rather go back to the certain pain, which is a comfort level, than to venture forward into the unknown.
Yeah, so, comfortable pain, we refer to that as. Yeah,
comfortable pain.
Guys, I hope that our conversation is thought-provoking to you. Obviously, you could tell we do not have all the answers here as we went back and forth and tried to just challenge it. But the idea here is, are you being called to something? What would that look, feel, or sound like? And then what's keeping you back, right? What's the chance that you could get out there and try something that you're really being called to do? I don't know, like different things that I've said in my life. I do not. We're trying to live a life without regrets. We're trying,
I missed that, Mark.
Well, but there's certain things that I've done in my life that I've said right up front, I'm going to do this because I don't ever want to think about what could have happened.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to be, that to me would be haunting.
Yes.
To be 60 or 70 and say, man, I never gave it a shot.
Yeah.
Like, so, and I've failed at many different things. Just ask Linda. But that idea of...
I'm going to back up on that. You may not have achieved what you hoped to achieve.
Yeah.
I think it's important not to frame it as a failure, though.
Sure.
That you failed. It's a process. We never know where it's going to. I think that's dangerous. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
and
push back on you.
I use the word failure, but one thing that has been a success, and I've said this before on shows. My dad, I'll say by the world standard, has failed at many things, but one thing he didn't fail at is you give it a try. You get out and give it a shot.
Right.
Give it a shot. And because all of us kids saw Dad giving it a shot, whether it blew up in his face or not.
He gave it a shot.
And all of my siblings have been very much the same way. Well, go give it a shot. And that continues down even with, my own kids. Like, give it a shot. Like, who knows? So
I have a story if we could end on that. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. And it's something I've remembered over the years. This old boy pulls into a gas station in one of those country general stores with a pump out front,
Mm-hmm.
And he gets out and he's pumping his gas, and there's an old hound dog. I don't know if I've ever said this to you.
I don't think so.
There's an old hound dog laying up on the porch, and while the guy's pumping the gas, ever saw that old dog go, oh,
sorry about that, guys, that you had to hear.
I'm going to do it again here a few times. So he keeps pumping, and the old dog, that old hound dog, he's making this noise, and the guy's like, what in the world? So, this is in the day before the credit card thing, and he has to go into the general store to pay the owner in there, and the guy's behind the counter, and he pays him for the gas. He said, hey, by the way, what's wrong with that old hound dog on the porch? And the owner said, oh, he's just sitting on a nail. And the guy said, well, why doesn't he move? And the old boy said, well, it don't hurt that bad. No. And that's us.
Yeah.
That's us.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'd rather whine than get up and move.
Comfortable pain. Yeah. Guys, we want to thank you for listening. Put some of this to action. Test it out. Put your toe in the water. Do some things that are going to change your life a little bit. One thing that came to my mind is, a big reason why people have depression in their life is because they start to lose purpose. They don't quite know why they're there. And I think being stuck in Egypt starts to make you go, is this all it is? Like, I'm just sitting here watching TV shows. And so sometimes you got to go out and go, what is my purpose? So maybe you go out and try something new, and it reinvigorates and puts purpose back into your life. So
oh, I could go on that for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. You got anything else you want to end with besides that whole other story?
No. I don't know how many responses you get, but I'd be curious if you've listened this far. What are the Egypts that you're wrestling with? I don't know if there's a way to do this anonymously, but I'd be curious to hear what some of the Egypts are that when you look at your life. I think there's a pretty much a general core group. But if you get some time, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. No, you can Hutch at rocksolidfamilies.org. You can go to our website. We have info at rocksolidfamilies.org. I'll post all this stuff on social media, Facebook and stuff. Instant or private message me. Yeah, we'd love to hear that. Also, questions, guys. We get questions. I get a lot of questions that come in the office. But if there's something that you hear that's kind of sparking a question, let's wrestle it out here. I mean, that'd make a good show. Game.
Just a list of questions and move through. So,
Anyway. All right, guys. We want to thank Quality Auto Mart, Casey's Outdoor Solutions, and 4-Speed on 50 Diner. We want to again thank all of you guys for continuing to support and listen to what we do. Carl, I want to thank you for your insights and just what you add. And so, how about you guys go out there and be a strong dad? Strong Dads wants to thank Quality Auto Mart and Service for being a proud sponsor of the Strong Dads podcast. Started in 1985 and going strong for all these years. Recently, Quality Auto Mart has transitioned from owners of Mark and Nancy Repke to longtime employee Fred and Lorene Venus. For all your automotive needs and golf cart needs, check out Quality Auto Mart, located across from Indian Lakes on Highway 46 outside of Batesville, Indiana. Casey's is a premier garden center and gift shop located in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Casey's offers a wide selection of plants, landscaping materials, home and garden decor, and gifts for every occasion. Casey's is committed to providing exceptional service, a unique shopping experience, and value to every customer. Stop in and see what makes Casey's so unique. Located at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana, or call 812-537-3800. Let Casey's help you add beauty to your home.